Hello, everyone. Tonight we're about to travel further than any chariot, further than the gossip of the gods, and way, way further than your local supermarket aisle, straight into the world of ancient Macedon, where a man named Alexander ate his way across continents while building an empire and the occasional hangover. Yes, you guessed it tonight. We feast on the real menu of Alexander the Great. Forget about those statues with perfect abs. History never tells you who had the worst garlic breath at the Battle of Gaugamela. We're going to sniff out the flavors, the shortages, the weird food rituals, and the little moments that taste more real than any marble bust. Before we lift the lid on Alexander's travel-sized lunchbox, go ahead and like, subscribe, and ring the bell if this sort of midnight snack is your thing. And if you're out there listening right now, say, in Thessaloniki at 1 a.m., or Cairo at midnight. Leave a comment and tell me what your fridge looks like after dark. Because let's be honest, I'd rather raid your kitchen than face another Macedonian ration of barley porridge. So dim the lights, crank up a tiny desk fan for that ancient campfire vibe, and let your mind sprawl out like Alexander's own army beneath the stars. Join me, and before you know it, the grapes will be crushed, the wine will be flowing, and you'll taste the world exactly as Alexander might have. One curious mouthful at a time. You blink awake, sand scratching your eyelids, and the dawn as cold as a Macedonian mother-in-law, somewhere beyond the battered canvas of your tent. A goat is objecting loudly to its fate, but the fire's already caught thin blue smoke rising in the chill air, twirling around the battered shields, the bronze helmet stacked like turtle shells at the camp's edge. You're hungry. Of course you are. Every soldier in Alexander's army is always hungry, but there's something about that first whiff of roasting lamb, the fat hissing over coals. That makes you forget just for a moment the blisters on your feet and the fact that you haven't bathed since you left Pella. The smell is rich, almost sweet, curling over the gritty aroma of burned twigs and last night's ash. And for a heartbeat, you almost believe you're back home, listening to your grandmother mutter curses at the neighbors while stirring a pot. You stand, dust off your cloak, and step into the swirl of early morning chaos, horses snorting, men laughing or faking it, someone already singing about lost lovers and lost bets. A general could be Antigonus, could be a guy named Staminos, who once lost a wrestling match to a mule waves you over. There's a spit, rammed with a slab of lamb, still pink in the middle, and next to it a battered jug of oil spiked with wild thyme, and a pinch of something red that might be pepper, or possibly dried beetle. You don't ask, you just take the cup, swirl the oil over the meat, and watch the flames leap. There's bread, too coarse, flat, hot from the coals, the crust so rough it could double as sandpaper for your elbows. You break off a chunk, dip it in the lamb fat pooling at the edge of the fire, and chew, tasting smoke, salt, the ghost of last night's garlic. This is breakfast, Macedonian style. Forget figs and honey. That's for the royal tent. Out here, you eat what you can grab, and you eat fast before the call to arms, before someone decides it's your turn to check the horseshoes or dig the latrine trench. If you're lucky, you might get an olive or two. If you're really lucky, you won't have to share. Alexander himself. Well, rumor has it he's not far away. Maybe at the far edge of camp with a cup of watered wine and a gaze that could freeze the Aegean. The king is strict about a lot of things. No sleeping in, no whining, no second helpings unless you're faster than Ptolemy, but when it comes to breakfast, he's almost superstitious. Eat simply, he says, like a lion before the hunt, though he's never seen a lion nibble on barley bread. But you keep that observation to yourself. You hear stories about kings who eat gold-dusted cakes for breakfast. Not this king. Alexander wants his men lean, hungry, and just desperate enough to chase him all the way to the ends of the earth. The smoke thickens. Someone tells a joke about Persian sausages, and you look down at your hands, greasy with lamb fat and dust, feeling like history's least glamorous extra. Then, somewhere in the half-light, the call comes, a trumpet blares. The first orders bark across the field. And just like that, breakfast is over. You toss the last bit of bread to a passing dog, the only one in camp with a full belly. Wipe your hands on your cloak and follow the smell of smoke toward another day. A hush, a breath, The sun rises, the army marches, and somewhere behind you, the lamb is just bones. You wake up for the second time this morning. If you count that little episode where a goat tried to eat your sandal, welcome to the daily breakfast parade of Alexander's army, less of a meal, more of a survival exercise with a side of passive-aggressive camaraderie. The sun is just a gold coin skimming the horizon. Dew still clings to your hair, and the air tastes of wood smoke, hope, and a hint of last night's garlic. The world outside your tent is an orchestra of noises, soldiers clattering bronze buckles, the low grumble of 100 hungry men, and somewhere, someone trying to sing a Macedonian drinking song with their mouth full of bread. You step out, and the first thing you see is a long wooden table, battered and uneven, flanked by every general who matters and a few who just happen to get up early. If you've ever imagined military strategy as some glamorous chess game, think again. Here, war plans are smeared in olive oil and punctuated by the sound of someone biting into a barley crust, so tough it could be repurposed as a shield. In front of you sits your ration, a loaf of barley bread, flatter than your morale after a week's march, and about as cheerful in appearance as a mud brick. It's been baked directly on hot stones, marked with scorch lines, and, let's be honest, you suspect a pebble or two has joined the recipe. The ancients called this maza, which, if you ask the right person, translates loosely as the best you can do when you're too far from the bakery and too close to Persia. There are no silver plates here, no fancy garnishes, just bread, salt, and the kind of cheese that could double as a weapon in close combat. You tear off a chunk, and it's warm from the morning fire, dense and heavy, with a faint nutty bitterness that says, I'm healthy, but secretly means you'll be chewing me till the next sunrise. You chew and listen to the generals, sprawled like sleepy lions on battered stools, arguing about everything from cavalry tactics to whether it's better to eat the crust or the crumb first. If you think great historical minds are above bickering over breakfast, you have not met Macedonians. There's Antipater, with his hair already perfect, flicking crumbs off his cloak with a disdainful air. He grumbles about supply lines, says, "In my day, barley bread came with sesame." And you're pretty sure he's lying. Parmenion, older than Olympus itself, sits silent, eyes half shut, weighing strategy and, possibly, whether to risk another bite of the cheese. Craterus is already halfway through his second helping, because he claims generals need extra strength. But really, everyone knows he's just greedy. You reach for a small bowl of olives, tiny, wrinkled things that look like they've seen too much of the world, swimming in oil and sprinkled with dried thyme. They burst with salt, sunlight, and a bitterness that makes you wince and grin at the same time. Someone passes around a pot of goat's milk yogurt, cool and tart, and you scoop a little onto your bread, hoping for a moment of creaminess to offset the relentless chew. Instead, the yogurt slides off and lands squarely on your tunic. You glance around, no one seems to notice. Or maybe they're just pretending after all. Dignity is as rare as fresh fruit out here. In the middle of all this, Alexander himself appears, barefoot, tousled, eyes bright with that unreadable glint he gets just before announcing another 10-day forced march. He skips the cheese, ignores the olives, and breaks his bread in ritual silence. For the king, breakfast is both habit and omen. Eat simply. Eat humbly. Remember you're mortal. You try to look like you're contemplating the mysteries of life too, but mostly you're just trying to get this chunk of bread down before someone calls for a training drill. Someone cracks a joke about Persian bakers, how they use honey and wheat, and how that's why their empire got so soft. Laughter ripples through the table, heads thrown back, olive pits flying. The generals tease one another, swap stories of home, and for a heartbeat. You're not conquerors, just men who miss their mothers' kitchens and wish breakfast came with figs. You remember what you've heard from the old veterans, how Alexander's father, King Philip, believed the army should eat together, from the same loaves and bowls. No special treatment for anyone, equality, or the illusion of it, held the army together more securely than any oath in this muddy breakfast club. You can almost believe it, the king, the generals, and you, all gnawing the same crust. And just as you find a stray raisin in your bread, a rare surprise. Like finding a gold coin in your shoe, Someone outside the tent yells that the horses are ready. The spell is broken. The generals push away from the table. Alexander wipes his hands on his cloak, and you gather your crumbs, licking salt from your fingers as if it's a luxury. There's no time for a second cup of goat's milk, no lingering over the ashes. War waits for no one, and neither does hunger. You step away from the table, belly half full, jaw sore, heart strangely light. Behind you, the fire dies, the bread cools, and the day begins with a soft, smoky hush. You think you know breakfast, but you haven't really tasted morning until you've watched Alexander the Great Conqueror, philosopher, notorious insomniac, size up a bowl of figs like he's planning his next military campaign. The sun is higher now, lighting up the valley with that unfiltered golden blaze only Greece or whatever part of Asia Minor you happen to be trampling through today can pull off. Somewhere, a donkey brays, a squad of spearmen shuffle by, clutching their bread and muttering about the difference between a quick snack and I'll eat later when the Persians aren't watching. And there, in the shade of a battered tent, sits the king himself, surrounded by a pyramid of food that looks less like breakfast and more like an edible crown jewel collection. Today, there are peaches, sun-warmed and blushing gold, each one fuzzy as a baby chick and as delicate as your last hope of a day off. There are grapes, plucked from some luckier vineyard than the last, and figs so soft you can split them open with a whisper. The scent is dizzying honey dripping from the comb, tangy and sweet, sticky enough to glue a hoplite sandal to the table if you're not careful. This is where you learn the truth, Alexander, for all his battle scars and speeches about hardship, is a sucker for sweets. Maybe it started when he was a boy, listening to his mother, Olympias, mutter spells over a honeyed cake, or watching Aristotle, the original know-it-all, munch a dried date and claim it would help him think in hexameter. Or maybe the taste of honey is just the one indulgence even a demigod king can't resist. Whatever the reason. If there's honey in camp, the king gets first dip. You find yourself in line with the others, a ragtag parade of officers, secretaries, and professional flatterers, each with a bowl, a crust of bread, and hope for something sweet. The servers are in a foul mood. Someone's stolen their best ladle again, but eventually you're handed a wedge of honeycomb that glows like amber and hums with the promise of sugar. You tear a piece off and let it melt on your tongue, the flavor and electric jolt of wildflowers, beeswax, and sun. Your teeth stick together, your heart lifts for a few mouthfuls. You could almost forget there's a war on. The generals bicker about fruit, who grew the best grapes, whose figs are more divine, whether Persian melons count as proper food or just clever water disguised as a snack. One officer claims the Persians pickle everything, even plums and garlic, which, if you ask him, is proof that luxury breeds madness. Ptolemy, the ever-loyal, raises a cup of watered wine and says, "A toast to honey, may it be the worst thing stuck in our beards this year." Laughter follows, sharp and tired, the kind of joke that tastes better for being shared at the edge of exhaustion. But beneath all this, you sense a subtle tension, a layer of meaning thicker than the honey. The fruit on the king's table is a map, peaches from Macedonia, figs from Egypt, apricots traded from deep in Persia. Each bite is a little victory, a reminder that, if nothing else, you can still claim a taste of home, a scrap of something sweet. And yet, it's also a sign of how far you've traveled, how much of the world now flows through the king's fingers. Alexander never misses a chance to sample the local delicacies. Half his strategy seems to be conquer now. Ask what's for dessert later. You help yourself to a handful of grapes, cool and bursting, the juice running down your chin in undignified streaks. Someone offers you a wedge of melon Persian, probably, pale green and honey-scented. You chew, savor, and wonder if it's true what they say that Persian cooks can turn fruit into a dozen different sweets, candied and spiced until they taste like summer, bottled for eternity. Then comes the dried fruit figs and dates, wrinkled as old soldiers, but packed with energy and stories. The older veterans swear a handful of dried figs can power you through a 2-day march, so long as you're not afraid of getting a little stuck in your teeth. Someone claims Alexander himself once bribed an oracle with a fig tart. Someone else whispers that the king's mother sent him jars of honey all the way from home. tucked into the bottom of diplomatic pouches and marked urgent in case the gods were watching. You listen, you taste, you feel the soft buzz of sugar in your veins. The air smells like ripening fruit, sweat, and ambition. Somewhere, someone is writing a poem about this moment, a pile of peaches in the dust, a king licking honey from his fingers, an army pausing between one world and the next. Maybe you'll remember it, years from now, when breakfast is just another ritual and honey tastes like memory. For now, you eat quietly, trying not to stare as Alexander asks for more. He's not greedy, not exactly, but he's curious, always chasing the next flavor, the next experience, the next legend. In a world of salt and steel, he chooses sweetness when he can. You wonder if that's what makes him great, not just the victories, but the way he turns every mouthful into a kind of celebration. A treaty signed with apricots and laughter. The sun climbs higher, the fruit bowls empty. Alexander wipes his hands, smiles at some joke only he understands, and signals that the day must begin. You take one last sticky bite, tuck a raisin behind your ear for luck, and prepare for whatever madness comes next. And as the morning slips into history, you stand for a moment, tasting honey and dust, your heart humming with stories, a hush, and breathe. You smell it before you see it smoke, sizzling fat, and that unmistakable, mouth-watering scent of something roasting on a spit. The sun is sliding down the western sky now, painting everything gold and crimson, and somewhere beyond the next line of dusty tents, the cooks are already at work, feeding an army that eats like it's planning to conquer the very concept of hunger itself. Step closer, listen, the fire crackles, spits, and pops, sending up sparks that drift lazily into the dusk like tiny, fleeting dreams somewhere nearby. A lyre strums half a tune, quickly drowned out by the barked laughter of soldiers passing around a battered wineskin. This is dinner, Macedonian style, or, more accurately, eat whatever hasn't run away yet, style. As the army scribes like to joke, you pick your way through the jumble of gear, past armor propped against a tree and spears stuck in the ground like oversized toothpicks, and head toward the heart of the action, a rough stone fire pit surrounded by every kind of humanity the king's campaign has swept up. Veterans from Pella, bearded Thracian mercenaries, Persian engineers, a few wily cooks who claim they can make a sheep's heart taste like victory. The smoke coats your hair, your clothes, your very soul, but it's a small price for the promise of roasted meat. Tonight's feast is as lavish as any army on the move can hope for, which is to say, a glorious chaos of whatever's been scrounged, bartered, or hunted that day. There's goat, lamb, and if rumor is to be believed, something suspiciously like wild boar, although no one's sure who actually bagged it. The fire spits and hisses as fat drips onto glowing coals, sending up a rich, savory perfume that draws every stomach within a mile. The king himself is just visible at the head of the gathering. Not perched on a throne, those are for soft Persians. Someone snorts, but sprawled on a rough blanket with his closest friends, laughing, tearing meat from the bone with his hands, and listening to tales from men who have followed him from the shadow of Olympus to the edge of the known world. Alexander's plate is a mosaic of choices, slices of lamb glistening with melted fat, skewers of spiced goat that snap between his teeth, and hunks of flatbread to sop up the juices. He eats with the easy confidence of a man who knows that in the morning he could be eating dust and dried beans or wearing a crown. Depending on how the dice fall, you squeeze in between a sunburnt phalanx man and a Persian scribe, your bowl ready. The cook's bark orders, keep moving, don't get greedy if you're lucky. You'll get a shank, not just a foot. You're handed a steaming slab of meat, slightly charred on the outside, glistening pink within. You burn your fingers, but who cares? It smells like heaven, like wild thyme and smoke and the promise of strength. There's no silverware. Why would there be? You tear off pieces with your teeth, juice running down your chin, and listen as stories swirl around the fire. Someone swears this is the same recipe Alexander's father, Philip, favored a simple spit roast, seasoned with salt and whatever wild herbs can be plucked along the march. Another claims it's a secret Persian blend, heavy on coriander and cumin, picked up after Gaugamela when the cooks looted a noble's kitchen. The truth, probably a bit of both. Alexander's army is a melting pot. No, a boiling cauldron of every flavor the world has to offer. The king raises a cup, the firelight catching the wine like blood. He toasts to victory, to the gods, to good friends and better dinners. The wine is rough, tart, laced with river water and bravado, but it loosens tongues and fills bellies just the same. You raise your own cup, hoping for courage, hoping the bitter aftertaste will drown out the aches in your bones. Feasts like this aren't just about eating. They're about binding the army together, one greasy, smoky, slightly questionable cut of meat at a time. Alexander is everywhere and nowhere in these moments, laughing with old friends, whispering to his officers, teasing the cooks, but always watching, always aware. His eyes scan the crowd, catching the little dramas, the quiet sharing of bread between rivals, the way a homesick new recruit gazes at the fire, remembering the taste of lamb back home. You realize, suddenly, that this is strategy too. The king feeds his men as he feeds their hope. And then, because no feast is safe from ancient improv, someone starts singing. At first it's a low, rumbling chant, half in Macedonian, half in some language you can't place. And then the whole circle joins in, a raucous, off-key chorus that rises above the crackle of the fire and the endless chirp of crickets. For a moment, you forget you're miles from home, halfway through Asia, a little scared and a little in love with the adventure. Now, the food is almost gone, bones picked clean, bread crusts vanished, the last glug of wine slurped straight from the skin. The embers glow, painting everyone's faces with flickering gold. Someone tosses a bone into the flames. The king is already leaning in, trading stories, promising tomorrow's breakfast will be simple unless the cooks catch a unicorn, in which case expect a surprise. Laughter, honest and tired, rolls through the camp. You lie back on the hard earth, your belly full, your face warm, the stars just starting to appear overhead. The world smells like meat and hope and campfire smoke, and for a heartbeat. You could almost believe you'll remember every taste, every voice, every moment, forever. A hush, and breathe. You wake to a world of damp grass, half-extinguished embers, and the distinct, slightly accusatory honk of a goose that somehow survived last night's dinner. Morning is a lesson in humility. Your breath ghosts out in the blue air. Your stomach, sated just hours before, is already hinting that maybe, just maybe, another bowl of something hearty wouldn't go amiss. Welcome to Asia Minor, where breakfast is a mystery novel and lunch might require divine intervention. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and try to blink away the memory of too many cups of soldier's wine, that heady mix of cheap grapes and bravado. Around you, the camp stirs to life, men coughing, yawning, complaining in half a dozen languages. Because this is the crossroads of the world, and everyone's hungry. The cooks are already at their makeshift fires, prodding the last of the embers, muttering curses at whatever rodent absconded with the night's hard-earned crumbs. Let's be honest, there's no royal breakfast spread waiting for you here. The morning meal is often the most honest moment of any campaign. Hunks of black bread, rough as a donkey's heel, dipped into leftover broth if you're lucky, or simply gnawed. Grit and all. A few olives might make the rounds, passed from calloused hand to hand. And if fortune smiles, or if you happen to have stolen from the officer's supplies, a sliver of salty cheese. You tasted all the smoke still clinging to the bread, the faint, grassy sharpness of the olives, the soft crumble of goat cheese on your tongue, equal parts comfort and defiance. Alexander himself, always a man of appetites but never a slave to them, is said to favor a simple meal at sunrise, a hunk of bread, a handful of dates, sometimes a cup of barley porridge spiced with a pinch of wild thyme and honey. The kind of breakfast that feels both heroic and slightly medicinal, guaranteed to keep you on your feet whether you're fighting Persians or hangovers. Asia Minor, for all its reputation as a land of plenty rich fields, fat sheep, orchards so heavy with fruit they nearly snap their own branches, has a trickster's heart. The land giveth, and the land taketh away. One day, you find yourself dining under olive trees, picking sweet figs straight from the branch, the juice running down your chin while the king himself shares a joke about the most dangerous fruit in the world. Fun fact, Alexander once narrowly avoided an assassin's fig. Never trust a snack that comes with its own mystery. But the next morning, you might be scrambling for dried pulses and stale barley cakes, cursing the gods because the supply wagons are late. The locals are hiding their grain, and even the goats look at you with suspicion. Famine is never far away, just out of sight behind the hills, waiting to sneak into your tent the moment you drop your guard. You feel the uncertainty in every bite, every whispered rumor around the fire. Someone saw fresh bread in the officer's camp. Someone else traded a handful of silver for a single pomegranate. Another claims the Persians dine every night on honeyed duck and roasted chestnuts lyres. All of them. But you listen anyway, letting your mind wander through imaginary feasts. The truth is, the army eats what it can get, and what it can get is a rolling feast of improvisation, forage greens, wild onions yanked from roadside ditches, rabbits that never knew what hit them, and the endless, unsung hero of ancient marching lentils. Lentils. Small, humble, and surprisingly tenacious. They're the backbone of the campaign diet. You sit cross-legged on a battered cloak, spooning up a thin lentil stew, watching as the light catches the specks of cumin and the tiny shreds of dried meat floating within. It's not glamorous, but it's filling. And there's a kind of quiet dignity in the way everyone, king and commoner alike, eats from the same battered pots. Alexander himself, if the tales are true, never asks for more than his men are given. No gold plates, no extra figs, no secret banquets hidden behind tent flaps. Once, after a particularly grueling march, a local villager gifts the king a basket of ripe apples, polished until they gleam like trophies. Alexander calls you over you, of all people, and with a grin that's part mischief, part magnanimity, hands you the largest apple. See, he says, the gods favor the hungry. You bite in, the tartness singing in your mouth, and for a moment, you forget about sore feet and cold mornings. But then comes the rain, the chill, the days when the grain runs low and the only thing on the menu is don't ask, just chew. These are the days you get creative parched barley ground between stones, mixed with a dash of river water and salt, pressed into rough cakes and grilled on hot rocks. The texture best described as enthusiastically gritty. The flavor somewhere between ancient survival and maybe I'll develop a taste for fasting. Yet still, there are small luxuries, wild honey discovered in a hollow log, handfuls of walnuts scavenged from the edge of an orchard, a flask of sour wine passed hand to hand around the fire. Even the lowliest meal is elevated by the camaraderie, the jokes, the endless one-upmanship. Who can tell the best story? Who can claim to have eaten something truly unforgettable? One Thracian swears he once dined on roasted hedgehog. You decide not to ask for details. Sometimes, on clear nights, when the stars crowd the sky and the air is heavy with the scent of crushed herbs and distant sheep, Alexander walks among his men, asking, "Are you fed? Are you strong?" His concern is real, and you feel it not just in your stomach, but in the way your shoulders loosen, the way hope curls inside you like a second, secret fire. And so, in Asia Minor, the table is both feast and famine, promise and threat, trickster and friend. You learn to savor every bite, to find gratitude in scarcity, laughter in the face of hunger. The trick, as any old soldier will tell you, is to remember that every empty bowl is just a promise tomorrow. The world might feed you like a king, a hush, and breathe. You step into the glimmering, perfumed twilight of Persia, where the air is heavy with the scent of rosewater and distant fires. There's a low hum of voices echoing under an impossible dome of stars. And somewhere, not far from you, a flute tries and fails to drown out the raucous laughter of a group of Macedonians making up new words to old songs. You aren't quite sure if you're awake or wandering through a dream. And honestly, Persia at sunset does that to even the hardest soldier. Here, everything feels painted, exaggerated, too rich, too sweet, too full of promise. Tonight, the king is in a generous mood after weeks of dust, sweat, and meals that taste mostly of ambition and smoke. The Persian lords, defeated but still absurdly stylish, have invited Alexander and his generals to a banquet, Not just any feast, either. The kind of spread that makes you question your place in the universe. You're not sure what's more intimidating, the fact that you're sitting on embroidered cushions instead of a log, or that the first course comes on a platter carved from something that once belonged to someone very important. Let's talk about the food, because my gods, this is a night for the ages. The slaves glide between low tables, balancing golden dishes, each one piled with delicacies so fragrant you feel your stomach jump. There's saffron rice that glows like sunrise, studded with tart barberries and the sweet crunch of toasted almonds. Slices of roasted lamb draped in pomegranate glaze, melting away at the touch of your fingers. You're handed a silver goblet, so heavy it could double as a weapon, filled with wine as dark as secrets and twice as potent. You taste everything, because refusing even a single morsel would be an insult and, between us, you'd rather offend a minor deity than a Persian host. Skewers of grilled quail, spiced with sumac and cinnamon, slide off the stick into your mouth, their flavor sharp and smoky. Honeyed apricots stuffed with walnuts, little bowls of yogurt and mint, so cooling, you wonder if your tongue will ever forgive you for eating so much bread dipped in it. And of course, figs, always figs split open and gleaming, so luscious that even the king seems distracted for a moment as he lifts one to his lips. There's more, so much more. Spice stews bubbling in glazed pots, fragrant with cumin and coriander, thick with lentils and chunks of slow-cooked goat. The air itself tastes different, warm, buttery, and just a bit wild, like you've wandered into a feast thrown by the gods themselves. You lose track of time and of the number of courses. Alexander sits at the head of the table, his eyes bright with something that's not just hunger. You can see it, he is devouring the experience, learning from every bite, measuring the power behind every new flavor. You laugh, you eat. You almost forget the hard weeks of marching, the endless complaints about stale barley, and the morning when your entire breakfast was a single, shriveled onion. The Persians have a way of making even the simplest things taste luxurious. A bowl of sour cherries, a handful of pistachios roasted with salt, bread baked so thin and crisp it shatters between your teeth. There's an art to it, a slow, ceremonial rhythm. Dishes appear and disappear, cups are filled and drained, stories are told, lies are politely ignored. There is, of course, the matter of etiquette. Macedonians eat with their hands, tearing meat, licking grease from their fingers, boasting about who can swallow the hottest pepper without blinking. The Persians, meanwhile, dab the corners of their mouths with cloths finer than anything you've ever worn, and seem to float through the meal with a serenity you find deeply suspicious. Alexander notices, and you see him watching, mimicking, learning. If you look closely, you realize half the generals have started eating with their left hand tucked under the table, trying to copy their hosts while pretending not to care. Someone whispers, "Blend in or starve," and it's hard to tell if it's a joke or a warning, every so often. The musicians pause and the servants bring out more wine, more fruit, more food. You lean back, stuffed and dazzled, staring up at the intricate pattern of painted beams overhead. Someone beside you wonders aloud how long it would take to get used to eating like this, to stop seeing every meal as a battle, every bite as a calculation. There are toasts. Of course, Alexander stands, lifts his goblet, and speaks something about unity, the mixing of peoples, the promise of a new world. You cheer along, though you're mostly just glad your cup is full and your plate isn't empty. Someone tries to translate a Macedonian drinking song into Persian, with disastrous results. Even the king laughs. But behind the laughter, there's an undercurrent, something just a little uneasy. The old Persian satraps keep their voices low, eyes sliding sideways at every joke. Alexander's oldest friends watch him, watch the food, watch the way he drinks the spiced wine. The air grows thick with more than just incense. You remember, with a jolt, that even the richest meal can turn to ashes if the company sours. There is a lesson here, though one Alexander learns faster than most. The table is a battlefield. 2. The food is an offering and a challenge. The etiquette a kind of test. You realize that what you eat, how you eat, and with whom you eat it, all matter. Tomorrow, you'll be back on the road, gnawing on hard cheese and remembering the taste of saffron. Tonight, though, You are a guest at the strangest, sweetest table in the world. And as the last fig disappears and the last song drifts into silence, you let yourself believe that, for a little while at least. You could learn to feast like a Persian, if only for a night. The lamps flicker low. Hush and breathe. You step through a doorwell, more of a curtain, really brushed aside by the trailing hand of a page. And instantly you're hit with a wave of smells so dense and heady it's like running full tilt into a parade, somewhere nearby. Honey is bubbling with sesame on a brazier, and you catch the peppery bite of radishes being pounded into a salad by a young man who looks as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Welcome to Alexander's next grand experiment dinner diplomacy, where every mouthful is a message, every course a lesson in how the world is supposed to work now. Here's the thing about Alexander. You're never just eating with him. You're participating in a spectacle. The table isn't just a place to fill your stomach. It's a stage, a battlefield, and, sometimes, a confessional. Tonight's hall is wide as a parade ground, the pillars painted in wild colors stolen from a peacock's dream. The torches gutter and sway as servants dash between tables. There's a low mutter of voices in half a dozen languages: Persian, Greek, Aramaic, Macedonian, even the slow, careful syllables of Egyptian, spoken by a pair of priests who keep eyeing the wine like it's about to turn them into frogs. You, being you. Try not to stand out. But that's impossible. Everyone stands out here. The Persian lords arrive with their beards oiled and their robes so brilliantly dyed, you wonder if they've sacrificed entire fields of saffron just for a night's impression. The Greek commanders, old-timers from Pella, grumbling about how the olives are never as good as home, sit on one side, bracing themselves for another lesson in conquering through cuisine. In the far corner, a pair of Indian envoys eye a tray of smoked fish with the dubious air of men who have seen too much. But the star, of course, is Alexander himself. He presides from a raised platform, not quite a throne, but close enough to send a message. Tonight, he wears Persian silk, but the circlet on his head is still Macedonian gold when he lifts his hand. The entire room hushes not with fear, but with a delicious, buzzing anticipation. You know something's about to happen. And if you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. Food arrives in waves. First, the dishes of the old world spit-roasted lamb, barley cakes, wheels of salty goat cheese drizzled with thick, green olive oil. Alexander smiles, catches the eye of an old general, and you realize this is comfort food for the conquering crowd. Then, with a flourish and more than a few nervous glances, the Persian cooks roll out their specialties. There's fesenjan, chicken braised in pomegranate and walnuts, so fragrant you want to bury your face in it. Stews of eggplant and lentil, little bowls of pickled herbs, and rice baked with cherries until it's the color of a bruised sunset. It isn't just food, it's a story, a negotiation, an invitation, and a dare. Alexander samples everything, and so do you, because in this new world, the quickest way to get exiled is to leave a grape leaf untouched. The Macedonian captains joke loudly about their delicate stomachs, but their plates fill up just as quickly as anyone else's. On the Persian side, you see the first wary smiles old rivals nibbling on roasted garlic, pretending not to notice when their new hosts reach for seconds. There are rules to this feast, unspoken but ironclad. You toast the king, you toast the gods yours, and, for good measure, everyone else's. You eat what you're given, and you keep your opinions about the texture of the lamb to yourself. Alexander, for his part, is a master of reading the room. If he notices a guest picking at a dish, he calls for something else, perhaps a honey cake from Sogdiana, perhaps a bowl of sour yogurt with cucumber, sharp as any Macedonian retort. All the while, music swirls through the air pipes, strings, the low beat of drums from the eastern provinces. Sometimes the musicians are so good you forget about the war outside. Sometimes they're so bad you consider staging your own rebellion. Somewhere near the end of the second course, a juggler appears, tossing fruit and daggers with the same careless bravado you've seen in Alexander's cavalry. The king laughs, and you're startled by the sound he is, for a moment, not a conqueror, but a boy in love with the world's possibilities. But here's the secret. Every bite, every cup, Every gesture, it's about more than hunger. Alexander is teaching his new empire to eat together, and in eating, to belong together. Food becomes politics, and politics, tonight at least, tastes like honey and wine. The Persian satrap who raises a glass to Alexander's health isn't just being polite, he's publicly declaring, in front of everyone who matters, that he's ready to play by the new rules. The old Macedonian, who still scowls at saffron but won't stop eating, is quietly admitting that maybe, just maybe, he can find a home here. 2. The feast goes on. There are sweetmeats wrapped in lotus leaves, hard candies flavored with rose and cardamom, bowls of pistachios and almonds passed from hand to hand. Every now and then, someone stands to tell a story of a battle, a journey, a narrow escape. The stories get wilder as the night grows older. Alexander listens, head tilted, eyes shining. He drinks, but never too much. He eats, but never so quickly as to forget the faces at his table. You, stuffed and tipsy. Lean back and realize you're witnessing something rare, a moment when power isn't just shown through swords and soldiers, but through generosity, through the sharing of bread and salt and hope. For a brief moment, you let yourself imagine a world where every conflict can be solved over a table set with the best dishes of a dozen lands. But the wine runs out, the lamps burn low, and the servants begin to clear away the dishes. The musicians play a last, lingering chord. Alexander stands, stretches, and the spell breaks. Just a little. Tomorrow, the world will be hard again. There will be orders, marches, rumors of revolt. But tonight, the king has conquered in the oldest, softest way there is, by bringing people together around a feast. You feel the hush fall, a gentle, fading sigh, and, for just a breath, all is well. You're trudging through dust? No, scratch that. You're basically wearing the dust at this point. It's in your hair, under your tunic, in places you didn't know could itch, and the sun is beating down with all the mercy of an unpaid tax collector. Welcome to the daily commute of Alexander's army, a glorious patchwork of tired feet, creaking leather, and bellies that grumble in every language from Macedonian to Sogdian. The stories sing of feasts and silken banquets. But this is the meal plan of empire on the move. And it's about as glamorous as a pair of sandals after 6 weeks in the desert. Forget golden goblets and honey cakes for a minute. Here, food is not about pleasure, it's about fuel, survival, and sometimes, honestly, creative desperation. The day starts before dawn, when the stars are still blinking awake and the camp smells faintly of last night's smoke, mingled with the bitter tang of sweat and old vinegar. You roll up your cloak, rub the sleep from your eyes, and watch as the cooks really just, whoever lost the dice last night, poke around in sacks for anything that might resemble breakfast. What's on offer? Barley porridge. Mostly barley. The ancient world's answer to what can we eat that will not kill us but also won't make us happy. Ground into a coarse meal, mixed with water or a splash of whatever passes for goat's milk, and boiled until it turns into a sticky, beige mush. You swallow it in spoonfuls, pretending it's something more glamorous, and add a pinch of salt if you're feeling fancy. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of dried fig or a smear of sour cheese left over from the officer's table. If not, well, you chew faster and don't ask questions. As the column forms up, you eye your traveling companions. Some carry battered shields. Others balance baskets full of hard bread and onions. A few optimists try to wrangle chickens that look like they've already given up on life. The army is a moving village, and every mess group is its own tiny universe of rivalries, jokes, and secret recipes. Someone always claims to know the trick for keeping bread soft, and someone else is quietly boiling lentils in a dented copper pot that's seen more battle than some of the new recruits. The day's march is long, and your stomach is a clock tick, tock, rumble, ache, somewhere before noon. The call for a halt goes up, and you collapse in the scant shade of a rock or a single stubborn bush. Lunch is, let's say, unpretentious. You pull out a chunk of barley bread, hard as a shield, but reliable. Tear it with your teeth, and chase it with a few olives if your squad's got the connections. Maybe there's a hunk of salted fish, sharp and briny, traded for last night's share of wine. Maybe just a handful of wild greens, foraged from the roadside and prayed over in the hope they're not secretly poisonous. Sometimes, the army passes through friendlier country and the local markets open up like gifts from the gods. Suddenly you're stuffing your cloak with apples, honey cakes, or miracle of miracles. A roast chicken that someone's uncle's cousin's neighbor swears is from the very kitchen of King Darius. Mostly, though you make do with what you have. The Macedonian stomach, as every soldier will tell you, is like Alexander's ambition. It adapts or it dies. As you eat, you listen. The banter drifts up and down the line's dirty jokes, tall tales about home, debates about which spring in Macedonia has the sweetest water. There's always some grizzled veteran with a story about the time he marched all the way to the edge of the world and survived on nothing but boiled thistles and rainwater. You laugh, because it's either that or cry. And anyway, no one likes a soldier who complains about food the gods might be listening. By afternoon, the sun is a molten coin, and you feel every crumb of your last meal evaporate into the air. The cooks are already thinking ahead, cobbling together whatever they can find for the evening stew. Water, when you can get it, is precious and always slightly suspect, sometimes sweet. Sometimes with a flavor that suggests just upstream from a herd of goats. You drink anyway, because thirst is more dangerous than a cranky stomach. At the heart of camp, the officers dine a bit better. You can smell their dinner if the wind is right roast meat, maybe, with a drizzle of oil or a scattering of wild herbs picked by a clever servant. For the rank and file, it's more barley, maybe lentils if someone got lucky at dice, and always that faint, metallic tang of tin cups and old iron pots. If someone's feeling generous or drunk, a flask of cheap wine makes its rounds, sour and thin, but potent enough to grease the edges of another night under the stars. And then sometimes a miracle. Alexander's quartermasters, those magicians of supply lines, produce something wonderful, a cheese from the hills, crumbly and tart, a few dried apricots, golden as sunlight, or a sticky cake of honey and nuts that tastes, for one brief moment, like you're home again. You share, you savor, and you try not to wonder when you'll see food like that again. As darkness settles, the fires flicker and the smells of smoke, sweat, and barley blend into a perfume you'll remember for years. Some men sing, some grumble, some sharpen their knives and stare into the embers. You settle down, your head on a sack of beans, belly neither full nor empty, and watch the sky for omens, maybe a sign that tomorrow's march will bring better fare, or at least that fewer rocks in the bread. Because in Alexander's army, food is more than fuel. It's comfort, it's community, it's a stubborn refusal to let the road win. And as you drift toward dreams, don't blame the barley. You realize there's a peculiar kind of glory in simply surviving another meal on the march. A hush, a slow exhale. The army sleeps. And so, perhaps, you can smell it before you see it, the mingled aromas of smoke, sweat, and something sharply sour wine, or what passes for wine out here, sloshing in battered amphorae as the sun goes down over the encampment. If you ever wondered what hydrated a Macedonian army, or why ancient banquet songs so often devolved into giggles and off-key harmonizing, here's your answer. Forget sparkling clean fountains or designer bottled water. In Alexander's day, every gulp was a gamble, and the safest drink was often the strongest. Let's start with water, because nothing tests your optimism like a dusty mouth and a goatskin flask that's been sitting in the sun all day. The rivers you cross out here, whether trickling through Persian hills or gurgling between the bones of a ruined city, are a gamble every time. Sometimes the water is as clear as a priest's conscience, which, to be fair, in ancient Greece is a low bar. More often it's tinged with a suspicious green haze or tastes like it's passed through half the army before reaching your lips. The men squint, sniff, and, with the fatalism of those who've seen too many campaigns, gulp it anyway. Boiling helps, if you have the time and fuel, but most days you just roll the dice and hope for the best. Now, wine, that's another story. You might imagine flowing fountains of red in the style of Dionysian orgies, but what you actually get is a thick, potent brew so rough it makes your eyebrows try to escape your face. The army's wine arrives in clay amphorae, or, for the truly unlucky, repurposed goat bladders don't ask. It's strong, often cloudy, and sometimes laced with resin, herbs, or whatever the quartermasters decided looked vaguely grape-like that week. Drinking it straight is considered barbaric even by Alexander, who once scolded a Persian noble for downing his cup without diluting it. Even the gods know better than to drink unmixed, he jokes, raising his own cup and sloshing in a generous portion of water. You, the weary marcher, fill your wooden cup and glance around. Dilution is an art, not a science. Mix it too strong and you'll be singing Homeric epics to the goats before sundown. Too weak and your squad mates will call you milk drinker for a month. Most settle somewhere in between, just enough bite to remind you of home. Not enough to make you forget which way is east. The flavor is, let's be generous, robust. Notes of sun-baked clay, a little wild thyme, a dash of something that might be yesterday's boots. You swallow and chase it with a chunk of bread, wincing as it goes down. Drinking isn't just about quenching thirst, it's about ritual. The officers gather under a makeshift canopy, each with his own battered cup and an air of forced nonchalance. Alexander himself prefers to drink last, raising his vessel only after every friend, rival, and hangers-on has had their fill. Some say it's a gesture of humility, others say it's a power move, proof that the king trusts his men enough to drink whatever's left in the jug. Either way, when he lifts his cup, the circle hushes. Toasts are made to victories, to home, to lovers left behind and horses not yet lost to Persian arrows. The bravest might slip in a joke at the king's expense to the only man whose liver is as tough as his sword arm, and laughter ripples through the night, on ordinary evenings. The drinking is steady, measured, cautious. You've seen what happens when a few cups too many turn a celebration into a disaster. A brawl breaks out over who gets the last onion. Someone trips over a campfire, and the next morning's march is a parade of groans and red eyes. Alexander, for all his legendary appetites, knows how to keep order. A nod here, a word there, and somehow the revelry winds down before the wheels come off. He likes his men a little drunk, never insensible though. As the Persians soon learn, a Macedonian can outdrink almost anyone except, perhaps, an actual Scythian. Of course, there are exceptions. Sometimes, when the battle is won and the stars are bright, restraint goes out the window. The wine flows, the stories grow taller, and soon the air is thick with music and shouts. You find yourself pressed shoulder to shoulder with men from a dozen cities, each boasting of their drinking prowess or the time they outwitted a Thracian merchant for an extra skin of honeyed mead. Someone passes you a cup, and you don't ask what's in it. You drink and let the world blur pleasantly around the edges. The Macedonian Symposium, as the Greeks call it, is both equalizer and amplifier. Old grudges are buried or, occasionally, reignited over a spilled cup. The bravest sing, the shyest joke, and Alexander himself, flushed with victory and vintage, might leap up to recite a passage from the Iliad. His Achilles obsession never takes a night off. You clap, you cheer, you pretend the wine isn't working its way into your toes. But not all drinking is joyous. In the hardest marches, when supplies run thin and tempers flare, the wine is doled out in strict rations, a precious comfort against despair. Water, thick with silt, is sometimes all that stands between the men and disaster. And when the king calls for a halt at the edge of some blasted plain, he lifts his cup to the sky, pours a libation for the gods, and every man follows suit, a wordless prayer that the next river will be clean, the next cup filled with something other than mud and memory. You drink, and for a moment, you belong to this army, to this mad campaign, to the great swirling river of men and myth that stretches from Macedon to the edge of the known world. The wine burns in your throat, the water washes the dust from your teeth, and as the fires flicker low, you close your eyes and taste the future brighter, perhaps, and just a little sweeter. A hush falls, the last cup is drained, and the night, as always, marches on. You're invited? No, really you. Don't look behind you for some nobleman in finer sandals. You, caked in a week's dust and still carrying the memory of yesterday's dried figs in your molars, are about to sit down to an officer's feast in Alexander's camp. Feast is a word that does a lot of heavy lifting here because what it truly means depends on who's left standing after the last charge, who's angry with whom, and whether the latest shipment from Macedonia has managed to survive Persian customs, sticky-fingered soldiers, and the occasional curious rat. The sun has slipped below the hills, leaving the tent aglow with lamp smoke and a chorus of grumbling stomachs. You settle onto a low couch, or, if you're new, the not-so-comfortable guest mat near the door, while the high brass gather in a loose horseshoe of camaraderie, rivalry, and tightly controlled egos. Your first impression, there's no such thing as a quiet general. Their voices fill the canvas like a flock of crows, loud, overlapping, and sharp. If you're expecting dignified silence and polite conversation, you've walked into the wrong century. First comes the ritual hand-washing a basin, some water scented with lavender or, if someone's feeling homesick, bitter mountain herbs from back home. A slave pours a trickle over your dusty fingers and act equal parts hygiene, and let's hope no one's tried poisoning the olives again. You dry your hands on a linen cloth that's seen better campaigns and pretend not to notice the stains. No one ever does. Now, food. The first platters arrive with ceremony, a whole roasted goat, its skin crisp to golden perfection, stuffed with wild garlic, leeks, and if supplies are good fistfuls of dates and pine nuts, you catch the aroma, rich and earthy. The crackle as the knife sinks in, juices spitting onto the trenchers. Beside it, bowls of lentil stew, fat with onions and chunks of salted pork, flatbreads still warm from the fire, and a salad of bitter greens so fresh they might bite back. There are olives always olives plump, salty, and suspiciously shiny. There is also, of course, the question of poison. This is not a hypothetical ask anyone who's dined with Alexander's court more than twice. It's an occupational hazard, like blisters or being trampled by elephants, somewhere near the head of the table. The royal taster does his job a swift, practiced nibble from each dish, a swallow, a very long pause, and then, if fate is kind, a nod. The generals clap him on the back. You try not to stare at his trembling hands. Alexander sits at the head, posture loose, eyes bright. He jokes, listens, offers toasts. On a good night, he's everyone's favorite cousin. On a bad one, he's a storm ready to break. He picks at his food, always last to serve himself, and watches who eats what, who passes which platter, who offers the best story. If you want to survive here, learn to tell tales with just enough flattery and a dash of danger. Or, better yet, learn to laugh at yourself before anyone else does, as you eat. The air thickens with conversation. Stories of home, boasts of past battles, debates about the best way to marinate goat. Old rivalries flicker. Ptolemy and Hephaestion argue about tactics, their words sharp but faces slyly amused. Craterus laughs so loudly he makes the wine jugs tremble. Someone challenges Clitus to an eating contest. He accepts. And before you know it, the feast is half finished, and Clitus is halfway to regretting his life choices. Meanwhile, Alexander listens, occasionally interjecting with a joke or a quote from Homer. Yes, he has memorized the Iliad, and yes, he will prove it at every opportunity. You sense his attention flickering not just to the laughter, but to the subtext who's aligning with whom, who sits a little too close, who's unusually quiet. This is a dinner, yes, but it's also a map of loyalties, a chessboard with bread and bones for pieces. The food keeps coming: roast pigeons with pomegranate, honeyed chickpeas, fried cheese with fresh thyme, the occasional extravagant luxury like a silver bowl of saffron rice borrowed from a Persian lord's kitchen. Everything is spiced, sometimes gently, sometimes aggressively. Coriander, cumin, black pepper if the traders from India have come through. Every bite is a surprise, some delicious, some memorable. Then there's the wine. The cups are never empty, and you quickly learn the rhythm: sip, eat, toast, argue, laugh, repeat. If you pace yourself, you'll last until dessert. If you don't, you'll find yourself debating the relative merits of Thracian versus Macedonian onions with the camp cook and wake up tomorrow with bread in your sandals. Sometimes, the mood sours old wounds opened by drink or a careless word. Voices rise, The tent tightens. Eyes flick to Alexander, who might step in with a joke, or, rarely, let the argument run. A dinner brawl is bad for morale, but great for reminding everyone that peace is always provisional. More than once, you see a dagger flash quickly hidden, tension dissolving in forced laughter, and another round of honeyed figs. Dessert is simple but good figs. Walnuts. Honey poured over curds. The best nights end with music. Someone plucks a lyre. Another sings a song from home, half remembered and half invented, for a moment. You're not conquerors, but boys in the firelight, full of food, wine, and homesickness you'll never admit. As the fire gutters low, the last bites are taken, the last stories told, Alexander stands, offers one final toast to the gods, to glory, to tomorrow's unknown road. You drain your cup and feel the warmth settle in your bones. The dangers of feasting in this world are real, but for tonight, you have survived them all. A hush, a sigh. The tent breathes out. Another night with the generals, and you're still here. You wake before the sun, that liminal hour when the camp is all shadows and yesterday's smoke. Your mouth is dry as a Macedonian proverb. Your tongue feels like it's been rolled in dust and goat hair, and your memory of the feast is patchy at best. Something about Clitus, a bet involving garlic, and maybe a fragment of an old Thracian lullaby warbled off key. No one warned you that Alexander's banquets could double as a tactical endurance trial. But here you are, not dead, not poisoned, just blinking at the low fog curling across the ground. The scent of last night's roasted goat still clinging to your cloak. The camp kitchen, at this hour, is a world unto itself, a low murmur of voices. The soft thud of knives against well-worn boards, the endless shuffle of feet and sleepy curses. You drift toward it, half by instinct, half by the gravitational pull of boiling water and the promise of breakfast. You're not alone. Soldiers slouch in with faces like wet leather, eyes half closed, bellies rumbling like distant thunder. A few, more optimistic than wise, splash water on their faces and start arguing about strategy as if the day hasn't even noticed how hungover they are. This is not the glamorous side of empire. Here, you see the grease-stained aprons, the fingers nicked from hasty chopping, the heaps of onion skins and stalks tossed to the crows. Bread is being baked, flat, round, aromatic, a scent as comforting as a grandmother's hug, if your grandmother happened to shout orders in Greek and threatened to break kneecaps over underbaked dough. Some of the loaves are stuffed with wild greens or dried fruit if the foragers did well. Others are plain, as solid and reliable as the men who will eat them. You watch as a cook, face red as a pomegranate, ladles thick porridge into clay bowls. The ingredients are simple barley, a trickle of goat's milk, perhaps a drizzle of honey if luck and the quartermaster are both smiling. For those with higher status or just sharper elbows, breakfast might include a wedge of salty cheese, a handful of olives, and a slice of last night's cold, roast a luxury for the ones who can barter a favor or two. If you're hoping for something sweet, you'll have to settle for fruit, a bruised fig, a wrinkled date, maybe a handful of grapes sticky with dew. You take a bite and feel the tang, the sharp pop of flavor, something wild, something honest, a taste of the land itself. Nearby, a junior officer tries to shake off his headache with a mug of watered wine. It purifies the blood, he insists, which is the kind of medical wisdom only a man desperately clinging to dignity will claim. You try a sip anyway, just to be polite, and cough so hard your soul nearly exits via your nostrils. But you get used to it. You get used to everything out here, from the blisters to the burnt onions, from the noise of the camp to the strange peace that settles in just before dawn, when even Alexander's voice has gone quiet, and only the snuffling of horses and the clatter of ladles fill the air. You catch snatches of conversation, an old mercenary grumbling about Persian food. Too many spices, not enough sense. A beardless youth waxing poetic about the honeyed cakes of Thebes. A pair of infantrymen plotting to liberate a wedge of cheese from the quartermaster's stash. And you just watch, you learn. You see that food here is not only fuel, it's glue, binding the soldiers together, reminding them of home, giving them something to hope for, even when hope is a rationed commodity. There's a kind of ritual to it, the cue, the gruff banter, the polite nod as you pass the salt, the shared silence as everyone tucks in. No one talks about last night's politics or tomorrow's orders, not yet. In the quiet. Every bite is a small victory. Outside, the sun edges over the camp, gilding spear tips, making the banners shimmer. Alexander himself might already be. Up rumor has it, he never sleeps long, always hungry for the next conquest, the next plan. You picture him eating the same bread, the same olives, maybe with an extra drizzle of oil, maybe not. Food, in the end. Is the great equalizer king or cook? General or goat herd? Everyone chews, everyone swallows, everyone hopes for seconds. A commotion near the cook fire, a pot tipped. A soldier yelping as he tries to rescue a half-cooked egg from the ashes. Laughter bubbles up, quick and bright. And for a moment, you forget about the wars, the marching, the dust. Here, in the golden haze of morning, with barley in your bowl and the memory of last night's feast still tingling on your tongue. You are simply alive. You finish eating. You rise. The world calls more battles, more blisters, more days strung together like olives on a skewer. But you carry the taste of this morning with you, a taste of vinegar, bread, and the unbreakable sweetness of survival. A hush. You shoulder your pack. The camp begins to stir for real. And another day in Alexander's world begins, scented with hope, vinegar, and bread. Let's be honest, nobody tells you. When you sign up for a little light world conquering, that your intestines will also be pressed into service as cultural ambassadors. But here you are, marching at Alexander's side, your sandals caked in unfamiliar mud, your nose twitching at scents you can't quite name. You've left Macedon far behind olive groves traded for endless plains. Familiar cheeses swapped for things you can't even spell, let alone pronounce. Welcome to the far side of the world, where dinner is a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. It starts innocently enough. You cross into Asia Minor, and suddenly, breakfast includes flatbread slicked with sesame, and bowls of thick yogurt so tart it could make a Spartan blink. Alexander pretends not to notice, but you catch him poking suspiciously at a dish of lentils sprinkled with strange, earthy herbs. It's good for the nerves, claims one of his Persian advisors, spooning up a generous helping. Alexander grins. So is victory, he replies, but he eats it anyway. And the table laughs, tension dissolving over borrowed spices, day by day. The menu gets weirder, and so do the stories that go with it. You remember the first time you tasted Persian pomegranate stew, tart and sweet and somehow savory all at once. Someone claims it was invented by an exiled satrap who missed his lover or his favorite goat. Depending who's telling the tale, the truth is lost somewhere in the saffron haze, but it hardly matters. You mop up the sauce with the edge of your bread, and you know you'll be dreaming about it for weeks, crossing rivers and mountains. You meet foods you never expected. There are dishes of lamb cooked with apricots, and pickled vegetables so sour you'd swear they're meant as a dare. Wild honey appears at breakfast, thick and golden, oozing over barley cakes. There's a fruit called quince that you try once, then avoid forever chalky, stubborn, like eating a perfume bottle. You watch Alexander accept a gift of candied melon from a Bactrian nobleman, biting in with a diplomatic smile that says, "Yes, this is delicious. Please don't assassinate me." Then come the great banquets. The Persians do nothing by halves, and you're swept into halls lit by 1,000 lamps, the air heavy with rosewater and roasting meat. The king's table groans under the weight of dishes, platters of pilaf studded with dried cherries, roasted birds stuffed with nuts and currants, bowls of yogurt whipped with garlic and herbs. There are tiny, tart citrus fruits that burst in your mouth, and thin, chewy breads that you wrap around anything not nailed down. Musicians play, dancers swirl, and Alexander, ever the chameleon, trades jokes with his new Persian courtiers, drinking deep from silver goblets, sometimes water, sometimes something much fiercer, you. Of course, try everything. It would be rude not to, and let's face it, you're hungry. Some of it is glorious rich, complex, dizzyingly spiced. Some of it, well, leaves you longing for a plain bowl of lentils in your mother's kitchen. You learn quickly to avoid anything described as aged in goat skin, or a delicacy for the honored guest. One night you taste a sauce so hot, you spend the rest of the evening clutching your ear in sympathy pain. The Macedonians mock you mercilessly, then do the same, sweating and red-faced, all pride and no regrets. But food, you notice, is doing what armies and treaties cannot. It's binding the camp together, slowly melting suspicion, Greek and Persian, soldier and noble. Everyone finds common ground in a steaming bowl or over a sticky cake. Alexander himself sets the tone, sampling every dish, praising the cooks, occasionally spitting something into a napkin with theatrical flair. It becomes a game: guess the spice, name the fruit, survive the aftertaste. Some nights, homesickness catches up with you. You find yourself staring at a bowl of pomegranate seeds, remembering the wild grapes back home, or the way your grandmother would bake honey into thick, chewy bread. You're not alone. Even Alexander gets quiet sometimes, tracing a finger around his cup, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. But the next course arrives, and you're pulled back into the moment. The laughter, the swirl of languages and flavors and possibilities. A hush. You lift your cup, wine, water. Who cares, and toast the madness of travel, the alchemy of food, and the strange fact that, tonight at least, you are exactly where you are meant to be, somewhere between a foreign land and the next great story. The night stretches on, scented with saffron and garlic, and you promise yourself you'll never take a simple meal for granted again. And when the sun rises, you'll march on, your belly a little braver, your palate a little wilder, your heart wide open to the world's next surprise. You'd think after crossing deserts, hacking through forests, and facing down the occasional mutinous general, Alexander's army would have earned a little downtime. But here's the real surprise in the heart of Persia. Downtime means you're about to be swept up in a party so lavish it makes Dionysus benders look like your cousin's backyard barbecue. Tonight is not just any feast. Tonight you are a guest at the wedding of Alexander and Roxana, and whether you're a hardened veteran or a fresh-faced scribe, you are about to be drowned in a sea of flavor, fragrance, and just enough political intrigue to keep you nervously glancing over your shoulder. The day begins with a bustle servant scurrying, cooks barking orders, the sharp tang of cinnamon and coriander chasing the morning chill from the palace courtyard. You walk through a haze of sweet-smelling smoke and catch sight of the main attraction, a whole roast sheep, glistening and golden, attended by a retinue of lesser lambs, chickens, and a particularly smug goose. The air shimmers with heat. A harpist tunes his strings. In a side chamber, Roxana is being bedecked in gold so bright you could use it to signal ships at sea. But let's be honest, you're here for the food, not the politics. Or so you tell yourself. You sidle past a row of Macedonian officers struggling to tie their sashes in the Persian style, a performance in itself, and grab a cup of something cool and tart pomegranate sherbet, laced with crushed mint. It wakes you up with a slap and a kiss. This, you decide, is how all weddings should begin. Then the banquet is called. You, lucky wanderer, are swept into a grand hall decked in hangings the color of ripe figs. Every surface gleams copper, silver, a sea of crystal. The first course arrives steaming bowls of ash-e-reshte, a Persian noodle stew thick with beans and herbs, lemony and earthy and surprisingly comforting for something that looks a bit like it was assembled by a sleep-deprived priest. Around you, generals eye the stew with suspicion, then dig in, slurping loudly in the Macedonian way. The Persians, meanwhile, spoon daintily, pinkies aloft. Judging no one openly, the meal is an endless procession, platters of saffron rice, each grain as separate as a philosopher's argument, crowned with sweet barberries and roasted pistachios. There are skewers of lamb and chicken, marinated overnight in yogurt and garlic, the meat so tender you could cut it with a stern look, bowls of salad made from herbs you can't name, and tomatoes so ripe they nearly burst. Trays of flatbread arrive hot from the oven, brushed with olive oil and scattered with sesame. You tear off a piece, use it to scoop up something spicy and green, and for a moment, you forget you're a pawn in someone else's political chess game. Wine flows like water, a toast to the bride, to the king, to the new union between East and West, and if you're clever, to the cooks, who get a louder cheer than any dignitary. Alexander rises, cup in hand, delivering a speech in Greek, then repeating it in halting Persian. The crowd roars approval at least, the parts they understand. Roxana smiles shyly beneath her veil, and you realize you're watching not just history, but a high-stakes experiment in cultural fusion. Tonight, everyone's pretending to get along. For now, that's enough. Between courses, musicians strike up, and the Macedonians, emboldened by wine, attempt a Persian dance. It's like watching oxen on ice, but nobody dares laugh too loudly. You try a bite of roast quail glazed with honey and sour cherries, followed by tiny bowls of pickled vegetables so sharp your jaw aches, dates stuffed with walnuts, bowls of yogurt flecked with dried rose petals, and the showstopper, a massive pilaf made with lamb, raisins, and more spices than you knew existed. The scent alone worth a poem or three. Dessert arrives on a parade of silver trays, baklava dripping honey, almond pastries dusted with cinnamon, sugared rose petals, and a rice pudding so rich you suspect it's plotting to take over the empire next. Children dart between tables, drunken soldiers toast the couple, then each other, then the sky itself. Politics pause for a moment. In a golden wash of laughter and spice, you lean back, belly full, mind spinning with flavors and the low hum of 100 conversations in a dozen languages. For a fleeting moment, it seems as if Alexander's wild dream of unity is not so impossible after all if bread and salt can bind two families. Maybe they can bind two worlds. The night grows deep, the torches flicker low, you hear the soft, secretive laughter of the kitchen staff, the steady music of knives on cutting boards, the clink of cups and the hush of silk skirts gliding over marble. Someone hands you a final cup of wine, dark as midnight, and you drink to whatever comes next piece. War, another strange feast in another strange land. You rise, blinking, as the revelry swirls around you. Outside, the night is scented with roses and roasting meat, and the sky is the color of old coins. You have seen kings marry queens, worlds collide over platters of pilaf, and you, still nameless and full, slip quietly into the shadows, content for once to simply savor the aftertaste of history. Morning in Alexander's camp doesn't begin with birdsong. It starts with the unmistakable sound of boots squelching through mud, someone cursing in Macedonian about their missing left sandal, and the persistent, universal hope that maybe today, just maybe, breakfast won't taste like last week's leftover goat stew. You're not waking up in a palace. You're half buried in your cloak, breathing the smoky perfume of last night's dying embers. And for one glorious second, you dream you're home. Then a trumpet blares, a dog starts barking, and you realize you're still living history, one cold, hungry sunrise at a time. Here's the first thing you notice about breakfast with Alexander the Great. There is no such thing as breakfast the way you know it. Forget pancakes, eggs, or coffee unless your idea of caffeine is biting a raw olive and pretending it's an espresso shot. You stand, stretch, and brush a fine layer of dust from your hair, wondering if there's any way to wash before your general's inspection. There isn't. Cleanliness is an afternoon fantasy, best reserved for special occasions or rainstorms. Instead, you shuffle to the nearest fire pit, where the most organized among the soldiers, usually the ones with the least sense of humor, have already begun doling out rations. Today, if you're lucky, it's barley bread dense, flat, and only slightly less edible than your sandal. Some mornings, it's yesterday's bread, hard as a philosopher's heart, and you have to dunk it in watered wine just to convince your teeth to cooperate. The flavor is somewhere between Old Stone and regret, but you eat it anyway, because hunger doesn't care about poetry. If you're a Macedonian veteran, you know to keep a piece of salted fish tucked in your pouch, tear off a chunk, let the salt wake your tongue, and you'll almost convince yourself you're feasting. If you're especially favored, say, you saved a captain's life last week, or can recite dirty jokes in 3 dialects, you might be handed a slice of goat cheese or a smear of honey. That's living like a king. The smell alone, sharp, grassy. A little wild reminds you there's more to the world than dust and discipline. For those with connections in the Persian supply train, or a willingness to barter away their only spare pair of socks, There's an even greater delicacy: dried apricots and figs, sticky and sun-sweet, little explosions of remembered orchards. The fruit is traded like coins among the men, and when someone manages to snatch a handful, he becomes the most popular man in camp for at least 5 minutes, or until he runs out. Water is a precious, finicky thing. On good days, it's cold and clear, pulled from wells or stored in clay jars. On bad days, you close your eyes, gulp, and hope for the best. Most soldiers, having learned from hard experience, cut it with wine or beer, not for the taste, but because even Alexander's ambition can't kill bacteria. The drink is weak, more a nod to ritual than a proper buzz, but it's enough to cut the chill of morning and help you forget the taste of musty bread. As you eat, you watch the camp come alive. Boys run errands, passing between lines of tents with loaves balanced precariously on their heads. Macedonian officers, impossibly clean in gleaming armor, bark orders about drills and patrols, their breakfast already finished and their patience short. Persians and Greeks, mercenaries and engineers, all jostle for a share of the morning fire, sharing gossip and curses in the universal language of the road-weary. The older soldiers reminisce, as old soldiers do, about how back in Philip's day, the bread was thicker, the wine stronger, and the mornings lazier. No one believes them, but it's a comfort all the same. Some mornings, Alexander himself rides through the lines, cloak billowing, a nod here and a word there. His own breakfast likely no grander than yours. He knows the power of being seen chewing the same hard bread as his men, of drinking the same thin wine, of sweating in the same dust. True leadership, or just good PR. You decide, but you wouldn't dare say it out loud. You see the camp followers too, cooks, smiths, merchants, and the odd philosopher still trying to scribble notes with numb fingers. Breakfast for them is business, the start of another day of bargaining, fixing, and, if you're unlucky, inventing a new tax on fig rations. Even the horses munch their morning barley, stamping their hooves in anticipation of another day's march. While somewhere in the distance, a goat makes a sound that reminds you uncomfortably of your uncle after too much wine. There's always one optimist who tries to make breakfast special. Today, it's Demetrius, the aspiring chef who once burned soup so badly, the smoke signals nearly brought down a Persian outpost. He's managed to pilfer wild thyme from a roadside bush and is sprinkling it on the bread. Does it help a little? Does it distract you from the growing ache in your feet? Only until someone mentions the day's march. And so, you eat, laugh, grumble, and prepare to move. The army is a beast with 1,000 stomachs, and breakfast is never enough. But it's a ritual all the same. You chew the last crumb, wipe your hands on your cloak, and eye the horizon. The sun is climbing now, the chill burning away, the promise of new miles glinting on every spear tip. No one talks about missing breakfast when the enemy is near, but everyone knows a hungry soldier is an angry one. And there's nothing more dangerous than a hoplite with an empty stomach. You fall in line, the rhythm of boots and banter picking up as the day begins, and somewhere deep inside, you store the taste of salt, bread, and bitter wine, enough to keep marching. At least until lunch, the line moves, the sun climbs, the world narrows to the crunch of bread and the hope of something sweeter on the road ahead. And in the hush just before the orders ring out, you catch the scent of thyme, the memory of apricots, and the almost laugh of a king who conquered the world, one mouthful at a time. The sun hovers overhead, spilling down on the army like the world's least considerate lamp. And you find yourself blinking in the fierce glare, wondering if this is what victory tastes like: dust, sweat, and the scent of boiled onions riding the breeze. It's midday now, and as you trail after the crowd toward the largest tent in the camp, you realize you're not just hungry, you're part of something much bigger than your own empty stomach. This isn't breakfast rationed in haste or lunch eaten on the run. This, finally, is the closest most of you will ever get to an ancient version of fine dining, the royal feast. You approach the king's tent as if crossing into a different world. The entrance is guarded, of course, by two of Alexander's toughest soldiers, men with arms like marble columns and the watchful gaze of shepherds who have lost one too many sheep to wolves. Inside, it's not opulence, exactly no marble floors or golden ceilings, But for a man who slept on the ground for weeks, the woven rugs, the flicker of lanterns, and the heady perfume of roasting meat feel like a dream made real. The air shimmers with anticipation, and the barely controlled chaos of dozens of cooks, servers, and musicians who know they're on display. Tonight, the tent's alive with stories everyone wants to be near the center, where Alexander himself will sit. Maybe even offer you a nod or a passing smile, a small kindness that makes you believe, for one sweet moment, that you're more than just another soldier in the great, lumbering machine of conquest. The king's table, if you can call a plank balanced on crates, a table stretches beneath a canopy of embroidered cloth, scattered with clay plates and metal cups that flash whenever someone laughs too hard or gestures too broadly. Now, the first rule of the royal feast, you don't eat until Alexander does. Second rule, you try very hard not to stare at the food taster. There he is, sitting just behind the king's right shoulder, thin as a reed and about as cheerful. His job is simple but terrifying: sample each dish before it's allowed near the king's mouth. Eyes locked on the cup for the barest hint of treachery. There are rumors, always rumors, of assassins with rare poisons from India, of cooks bribed by Persian gold, of the time someone tried to slip a toxic mushroom into the lamb stew and ended up as a cautionary tale. Spoiler, nobody asks for mushroom stew anymore. As the musicians tune their lyres and the servants begin their stately procession, you watch the first platters arrive. Roast lamb, golden brown, spiked with garlic and rubbed with wild mountain herbs. The smell alone could make a pacifist start a war. Next comes a shallow bowl of olives glistening with oil, sharp as gossip and twice as addictive. There's barley bread, still hard, but now softened with drippings and wedges of goat cheese that seem to have absorbed the sun, nutty and rich, paired with honey so thick you could patch your sandals with it. If you're lucky enough to sit close to the table, you might catch a whiff of something even stranger: a plate of grilled fish, seasoned with fennel and coriander, sent as tribute from the conquered cities along the coast. There are rumors these fish are so fresh they leap off the plate at least. That's what the cooks joke as they clean the bones afterward, for the more adventurous. There's stewed lentils, which the Persians claim is the food of philosophers, and a heap of vine leaves stuffed with rice and spices, sharp and tangy enough to make you forget you're not home. And then, the centerpiece wine. Not the weak stuff you chugged at dawn, but the strong, deep, almost purple-red vintage from Macedon, poured into cups as big as a child's head. It's watered down for the masses, of course, but not for the king or his closest friends who, after a cup or two, start trading insults and toasts in equal measure. If you want to survive a Macedonian banquet, learn to take a joke about your mother's cooking and never, ever try to outdrink a Thracian. The feast unfolds in waves. Alexander sits in the middle, sometimes laughing, sometimes brooding, a man both present and lost in thoughts of distant battlefields. He eats sparingly, a few bites of meat, a little bread, perhaps some pomegranate seeds if they are in season. His restraint is legendary, especially compared to the generals on his left and right, who have never met a roast they didn't try to finish. You hear stories, true or not, about how Alexander would sometimes skip a meal altogether, preferring to eat after his men, or not at all, just to show he was no stranger to hardship. All around, the tent vibrates with noise. Cups clash, stories swell and break like waves. Someone starts singing a Macedonian war chant, and inevitably, someone else tries to recite poetry in Greek, only to be pelted with grape stems for his trouble. The food taster, stoic as ever, stares into the middle distance, possibly calculating the odds of survival, or maybe just longing for a quiet life as a goat herd. But don't be fooled by the laughter beneath the surface. There's tension: who sits closest to the king, who gets served first, which ally is favored, and which general is slowly being frozen out. Political alliances are forged and broken over cups of wine and platters of figs. Every joke is a test, every toast a subtle pledge or threat. The king might offer you a plum, but you know he's measuring your loyalty as much as your appetite. Dessert, when it comes, is simple slices of melon, honey cakes, maybe a handful of dates, sticky and golden. The musicians switch to softer songs. Alexander rises, his plate barely touched, and the tent hushes. The meal is over. But the politics go on. The deals struck over bites of bread will echo in tomorrow's orders. As you stumble out, full or not, you catch one last glance at the food taster, who, by some small miracle, is still breathing. And you remind yourself tonight, you dined with kings not because you ate your fill, but because you learned, for a moment, that every feast is a battlefield, and every mouthful is history. The tent empties, the fire burns low, the echoes of laughter linger, sharp as the taste of wine, and outside. The world grows quiet once more, waiting for the next meal, the next story, the next surprise. Step outside the smoky hush of the banquet tent, and back into the tumult of Alexander's ever-expanding world, where a feast doesn't just fill your belly, it opens your mind, confuses your tongue, and sometimes, let's be honest, assaults your digestive system. You're not just eating like a Greek anymore. No, with every mile the army marches east, the food on your plate turns stranger, spicier, and a little more suspicious. One day you're spearing goat shanks and grumbling about the lack of olive oil. The next, you're puzzling over what exactly is floating in that bright saffron soup fish, or fate. The truth is, as the conquests roll on and the loot piles up, so do the flavors. When you're conquering half the known world, dinner is never just the usual. Persian bakers now knead their flatbreads at the edge of the camp, slapping dough onto hot stones until it's blistered and smoky. A welcome break from hard army biscuits that double as improvised shields. At dawn, the camp fills with the scent of cardamom and cumin aromas so sharp and new they could wake the dead, or at least the laziest camp follower. You watch as Alexander's cooks, half curious, half terrified, trade their clay pots for bronze pans and start experimenting with ingredients no Macedonian grandmother would recognize. There are honeyed nuts from Susa, dates stuffed with pistachios from Babylon, sticky and perfumed, and mysterious sauces so red they look like they were cooked in a volcano. Someone passes you a bowl of rice steamed with onions and wild herbs, a luxury that once belonged only to the Persian elite, and now, thanks to conquest, lands unceremoniously in your lap. It's sweet, savory, and just a little confusing, but you shovel it in all the same, grateful for anything that isn't more goat. Alexander, for his part, is loving it. He's not just a king, he's a culinary adventurer with the stomach of a diplomat and the palate of a man who's never heard of playing it safe. One day he's eating Persian stews thickened with yogurt and spiced with cinnamon. The next, he's dipping unleavened bread into eggplant purees, so smoky you'd swear they were cooked by lightning. He's got a fondness for dried apricots, figs, and plums fruits traded along the Silk Road, sticky with history and the scent of far-off lands. Of course, there are casualties. The Macedonian soldiers watch in horror as some brave soul tries a pickled quail egg, winces, then pretends it's the best thing he's ever eaten. Others, usually the same ones, who boast about drinking the most wine, discover that Persian street food sometimes comes with a price a night spent communing with the gods or the nearest bush. Still, curiosity wins out. For every skeptic who grumbles, give me garlic and barley bread, or give me death. There are two more who can't resist the shimmering platters of candied orange peel, or the cubes of lamb roasted with pomegranate molasses, juices running red as conquest itself. Alexander's feasts are now a diplomatic tightrope act. The Persian nobles he invites to dinner expect their own food rice pilaf with saffron, grilled river fish, and, for the truly bold, little pastries stuffed with minced lamb and sweet onions. The king is careful, he eats their dishes with obvious delight, cracks jokes about Macedonian cooks who think everything tastes better with olive oil, and makes sure every general at the table knows the difference between a Persian pomegranate and a Greek fig. The message is clear. We're all in this together, at least until the bill comes. Sometimes, the kitchen itself is the scene of minor revolutions. You hear cooks arguing in at least 3 languages, a Persian chef insisting that coriander is the soul of the stew, a grizzled Macedonian swearing by bay leaves and leeks, an Egyptian spice merchant slipping saffron into everything when nobody's looking. Pots bubble, knives clash, someone shouts about overcooked lentils. It's noisy, frantic, and weirdly, kind of thrilling, like watching the world's first reality cooking show. With slightly more risk of actual sword fights, there are surprises too. When the supply wagons bring in the spoils of war, one day it's dried mulberries and little cakes dusted with rosewater. Another, it's fresh pomegranates split open at the table, seeds spilling out like rubies, the juice staining your fingers a royal purple. Alexander has a knack for dramatic gestures. He'll pass a platter of rare fruit down the table with a wink, letting the generals know that this too is victory. Eat up. Gentlemen, the Persians lost a whole palace for this apricot. Of course, not every experiment is a triumph. The soldiers complain about dishes so sweet they set your teeth on edge, or soups so tart they make your lips pucker for hours. Someone accidentally eats a chili pepper and spends the next hour bargaining with the gods for mercy. Still, the mood is lighter than you'd expect. Food becomes a running joke, a way of making sense of the chaos. Eat what you can, when you can, tomorrow. It might be boiled leather and wild onions again. And as you scoop up the last of the rice with your fingers, listening to the distant hum of the Persian musicians Alexander has imported, because nothing says world conqueror like dinner with a full orchestra. You realize this is what conquest really tastes like. Sweet, sharp, surprising. It's the flavor of the unknown, the joy of eating your way across an empire, one bewildering, delicious bite at a time. The stars burn overhead. Somewhere in the night, the army stirs, hungry for more food, adventure, and perhaps a sliver of peace before the next march. You lick your fingers, savor the memory, and wonder what new flavor will tomorrow bring. Hush now. The night is still young, and the world, it seems, is yours to taste. Here's something you quickly learn. In the army of Alexander, the food may keep you marching, but it's the wine that gets you through the speeches, the boredom, and sometimes even the heartbreak. If you're picturing a handful of gentle philosophers sipping thoughtfully from delicate goblets, put that image aside. Friend, you are about to enter the wild, rolling, grape-stained world of Macedonian drinking, where the wine flows like ambition and nobody gets away without at least one story worth denying in the morning. You start, as ever, in the heart of the king's encampment, where a long, low table groans under the weight of clay jugs and silver craters. The surface is sticky with last night's revelry. The air is sweet with the perfume of fermented grapes, undercut by the sharper tang of spilled vinegar, sweat, and the ever-present dust. Soldiers drift by, nursing battered heads, eyes narrowed against the light, each one clutching a cup like it's the only friend they have left in the world. You're in good company, now. Greek wine isn't quite like the stuff you might be used to. For one thing, it's usually thick, potent, and let's be honest, sometimes tastes more like raisin juice gone rogue than the elegant drink of gods and poets. No matter, the trick, you're told, is to mix it with water. The ratio, hotly debated. Some like it half and half. Others insist on 3 parts water to 1 part wine. And a few legendary fools drink it straight. These are the men you find arm wrestling donkeys at midnight and composing impromptu epics about their own bravery or lack of taste buds. Alexander himself is no stranger to a drinking contest. In fact, he turns them into diplomatic events. After all, when you're uniting Persians, Greeks, Egyptians, and the odd Babylonian, nothing says teamwork like a communal hangover. Banquets are staged with all the formality of a royal audience, goblets passed, toasts shouted, libations poured to the gods, ancestors, and anyone else who might be listening, including, it must be said, the kitchen staff, whose prayers for mercy are sometimes the most desperate of all. You pour a little onto the ground for Zeus or Dionysus, because you never know who's paying attention. Then, with a dramatic flourish, you tip back your cup. The wine stings, sweet and sharp. Sometimes it's flavored with honey or herbs, sometimes with resin for medicinal purposes, which means it tastes like someone spiked your drink with pine sap and bravado. Everyone grins through the aftertaste, pretending this is what luxury means. As the night deepens, the party grows wilder. Laughter ricochets around the tent. Stories start to flow, tales of past battles, future plans, or the immortal epic of that time. Hephaestion tried to race a camel and lost his sandals. Alexander himself presides over it all, glass raised, eyes bright. You sense that he relishes these moments not just for the pleasure, but for the way they bind the army together, 1,000 men as brothers, if only for the night. Of course, things escalate. There are games Kotobos, where you fling dregs of wine at targets, and losers are required to compose poetry on the spot, or confess their latest crush, the more scandalous, the better. There are contests of endurance who can drink the most without blinking, who can balance a cup on their head while reciting Homer, who can avoid the wrath of the musicians by singing in tune. Almost nobody wins this one. Someone inevitably proposes a toast to the prettiest girl in Babylon, and the king laughs loudest of all. Not everyone can handle it. The Persians are, frankly, alarmed by Macedonian drinking habits. They sip their wine with decorum, then recoil as the Greeks treat every night like a festival of Dionysus gone off the rails. The old guard mutters about barbarian excess. The younger officers, well, they're the first to suggest another round. The party rolls on. There are, inevitably, consequences. Dawn breaks over the camp with all the mercy of an angry goddess. You awake on a lumpy cushion, mouth dry as an attic desert, brain full of regrets and faint memories, singing badly, boasting worse. Perhaps an ill-advised wrestling match with a Persian dignitary who is, miraculously, still snoring beside you. Outside, the cooks are already at work, simmering up a restorative soup made of barley, leeks, and hope. The kind of meal designed to bring you back from the dead, or at least get you marching again. The king, he appears, as ever, impossibly fresh, already issuing orders and preparing for another day of conquest. You wonder if he is part god, or simply better at pretending than the rest of you. The men groan, clutch their heads, and swear never again. By sunset, the wine flows anew, and the cycle begins again. And so, in Alexander's world, drinking is never just drinking. It is ritual, bonding, diplomacy, and, above all, a test of who can endure the wildest nights and still rise to face the dawn. You, cup in hand, are a part of it all, a little braver, a little wearier, and perhaps a little wiser. Or maybe just thirsty for the next story. The laughter dies down, the goblets empty, the shadows lengthen. For now, hush. Let the night have the last word, and may your hangover be gentle, at least until the next round. You've made it this far a survivor of marches, a connoisseur of roasted lamb, and a veteran of wine-fueled diplomacy. But as you settle in for what may be the grandest, strangest meal of all, you sense something different humming in the air, a current that runs beneath the laughter and clattering platters. Tonight's feast isn't just about filling bellies or forging alliances. This is a banquet with shadows at the edges, a last supper with Alexander, where every bite carries the aftertaste of destiny. Picture the great palace at Babylon, wide as a city block, ceilings lost in the smoky haze of torchlight. The marble floors are cool beneath your sandaled feet, slick with oil and scattered pomegranate seeds. Columns rise like petrified giants, half-remembered Persian gods staring down at you from painted capitals. Outside, the Euphrates slides past, carrying secrets and wishes out into the desert night. You smell jasmine, roasting meat, sweat, and the faintest tang of river mud, all tangled together in the stifling air. You take your place among soldiers, philosophers, courtiers, Persian nobles in robes glittering with gold thread, and Macedonian officers who look like they haven't slept in a week. The king himself enters late, of course, trailing a comet's tail of admirers, envoys, and bodyguards. He smiles, a little too widely. You notice the shadows beneath his eyes. Does he seem thinner? Or is it just the candlelight? History rarely pauses for a health check. Tonight's meal is a kaleidoscope of worlds colliding. Persian rice perfumed with saffron sits next to Macedonian barley loaves, mutton spiced with cinnamon and honey next to platters of Greek cheese and olives. There are bowls of mulberry syrup, heaped figs, and a suspiciously decadent dish the Babylonians swear by fried sparrows stuffed with herbs, sharp enough to wake the dead. Wine flows from golden pitchers, so sweet it threatens to steal the memory of water. And yes, there is always more bread, fluffy, crisp, hot from the ovens, broken and shared with the hungry, the proud, and the ambitious alike. Conversations spiral around you the latest rumor about the Indian frontier, a new province's taxes, the arrival of an elephant with a penchant for melons, and an argument over whether Achilles could outdrink Dionysus. A philosopher attempts to quote Socrates, is promptly drowned out by a wrestling match between two very determined generals. And everyone pretends not to notice as a Persian singer is nearly flattened by a flying pomegranate. This is the heart of empire, and it beats to a very loud, very complicated rhythm. Alexander raises his cup, and the whole room hushes. There is a toast, always a toast. This one is to the unity of the world, the friendship of nations, and the gods who hopefully will not send another plague before dessert. You drink, feeling the weight of history pressing against your ribs. You wonder who, tomorrow, will remember your name or his for tonight. You are both immortal and invisible, part of the living tapestry woven across east and west. But beneath the feasting, the laughter, the spill of honey on your fingers, there is something else, a hush, a knowing. The king coughs, just once, and a ripple runs through the room. He brushes it off, but you see his mother's ring turn nervously on his finger, the faint tremor in his left hand. Some say it's exhaustion, others whisper of poison, of curses, of a life lived at the edge of a knife. You are not sure you believe any of it, but you also notice the old soldiers eating more quickly, glancing at the exits, as if the night itself is a guest with a hidden knife. Still, the courses roll on. The musicians play a Macedonian ballad that turns, halfway through, into a Persian lament. A slave brings a dish of boiled eels, which you taste out of courtesy and immediately regret. Someone sings badly, bravely about home. You watch the king, his laughter slow and careful, the way he touches his temples when the music grows too loud. You realize that in this moment, every face here is burning itself into memory. Even the olives taste like goodbye as the night winds down. A Persian magician is called to entertain the crowd, juggling knives and predictions. He declares that great things come in threes: victories, empires, and endings. Nobody laughs at that one. Alexander himself nods, eyes far away. It is enough to have lived greatly, he murmurs, though you have to lean close to catch it. The room, for once, is still. The final platters are served cakes of honey and almond, syrup-soaked dates, puffs of barley sweetened with rose water. You eat slowly now, trying to imprint every taste, every texture, onto your mind. The king lifts his cup one last time, salutes the company, and drinks. There's a silence so deep you can hear the river moving outside, the distant bark of a dog, the breath of a world that knows this moment is about to slip away forever. When at last, the banquet ends. The guests drift into the night, some arm in arm, others alone, a few singing softly, most just grateful to have survived another feast. You linger a moment in the emptying hall, running your fingers across the mosaic tiles, feeling the echoes of laughter and the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Some say this was Alexander's last banquet, that not long after, he fell ill, struck down in the prime of his ambition, leaving a world that would never quite fit back together again. You can't help but feel that every feast, every shared loaf, every spilled cup was not just celebration, but a kind of farewell. So, you step out into the warm Babylonian night, stomach full, head spinning, heart heavy with what you've seen and tasted. The stars blink overhead, and somewhere a lyre plays a melancholy note. For one moment, history is not a story. In a book, it's the taste of honey, the echo of a toast, and the fading footsteps of a king. Breathe out. The story ends here, at the edge of the last banquet, tomorrow. There will be new conquerors, new meals, and new songs, but tonight belongs to Alexander, and to you.